What if everything you've ever dreamed of was just one conversation away? This is the story of a young man who almost gave up on believing in himself until fate brought a millionaire into his life, someone willing to bet on his potential. A journey that begins with fear and uncertainty but transforms into something much greater, proof that, with the right support, dreams can take flight. This story will inspire you to see opportunities where you least expect them. Since I was young, I always knew I wanted something more. Something beyond the traditional paths, the endless routine of a job that didn't fulfill me. I was dissatisfied, but I was also completely lost about how to take the first step toward what I truly wanted. The reality was harsh. I was trapped in a cycle where debts piled up, and each day felt like a repetition of the one before. I was working a temporary job, something that drained me but paid the bills. I had a vague idea of wanting to be an entrepreneur, but the thought of starting a business without even knowing where to begin seemed absurd. I barely knew the basics of running a business, and, honestly, my understanding of finances was very limited. The hardest part was the lack of support. The people around me didn't believe in me or my ideas. In fact, many said my dreams were nothing more than fantasies. My boss, who only saw what was right in front of him, seemed to mock my desire to become an entrepreneur. You don't have experience, let alone money. Better stick with what you have, you're not going anywhere with that idea. His words disheartened me deeply, but at the same time, something inside me refused to accept that reality. Why should I settle for that? My heart wasn't willing to spend the next years of my life doing something that didn't fulfill me. At that time, I didn't realize it, but what I lacked was the courage to start. And a part of me knew that if I didn't take action, things would only get worse. I'd remain stuck in that suffocating job, facing the same problems, with no solution in sight. That's when I began to think of an idea. An idea that, even without fully understanding how to put it into practice, seemed like the key to escaping that life with no prospects. I wanted to create something of my own, but the fear of failure was immense. When you have no idea what you're doing, the path to failure feels like the most likely one. But doubt and fear gradually started being replaced by something more powerful. I knew that if I didn't try, I'd never know what I was capable of. And somehow, deep down, I felt it was possible. It was something beyond logic. It was a belief that came from within, like a silent force pushing me towards something I didn't fully understand yet. What motivated me, however, was the desire for freedom. I wanted something that would take me out of this life with no future. I wanted not just to pay the bills, but to have control over my destiny. And amidst the uncertainty, I began to realize that only I could change this. If I waited for others to believe in me first, it would never happen. I had no money, no experience, but I had an idea. That was enough to start, or at least I believed it was. I knew I was about to take a step that could change my life forever, and maybe, deep down, I knew there would be no turning back. A mistake now could mean the end of this chance. But I was willing to take that risk. I didn't yet know how or where to start, but one thing was certain, I didn't want to be just another person. I didn't want to live a life full of regrets, telling myself that I could have tried. This was the moment, and the only thing left for me to do was act. But what I didn't know yet was that the greatest challenge would be figuring out who to trust, who would be willing to support me on this journey. The next day, I woke up early. I woke to the sound of the alarm clock cutting through the stillness of the morning, but unlike other days, something inside me felt different. I had decided to take the first step, but that decision didn't come without an enormous weight of fear and insecurity. I had an idea, but I didn't even know if it was viable. What I did know was that staying in a job that drained me was not an option. Something inside me told me this was the moment to act. With my heart racing, I began to research. Every keystroke felt like it brought me a little closer to my goal, but at the same time, the challenges were clear. I had no money to invest, and my network of contacts was almost non-existent. I began to realize the magnitude of what I was trying to do. It felt like I was trying to climb a mountain without ever having climbed one before. However, amidst my search, something unexpected happened. I was reading an article about entrepreneurs who started from nothing, stories of people who, like me, had nothing but their ideas. Then, the article mentioned a name that, at that moment, seemed almost unbelievable to me, a millionaire who started with nothing and was now one of the most sought-after investors in the industry. I never imagined I could reach out to someone so big. But a spark inside me said that maybe this was my only chance. I wrote a letter. A simple but sincere letter. I spoke about my idea, about how I was willing to work tirelessly to make it happen, even without experience. I knew this was a letter that could be ignored, but I was willing to try. I spent hours writing and revising, trying to put into words all my desire to be more than I was and to find a way to overcome the limitations surrounding me. I didn't expect a reply. And to be honest, I didn't believe one would come. But I sent it. I hit the send button, closed the laptop, and returned to my usual routine. But something had changed. Not immediately, but the thought that I had done something, that I had taken the first step, already made me feel different. I was no longer just a frustrated dreamer. I had taken action. What happened in the days that followed felt like a dream. About a week later, when I opened my email in the morning, I saw a response. A response that left me speechless. The millionaire, the one who seemed unreachable, had read my letter. Not only had he read it, but he had also replied. His words were brief but full of meaning. The idea has potential. If you're willing to work hard, I can help. Let's schedule a meeting. I froze. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Someone I never imagined would notice me was now willing to help me. A chance. An opportunity that could change my life. But at the same time, the fear of doing something wrong, of being incompetent, or even being seen as an imposter, began to grow inside me. The anxiety was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't let this opportunity slip away. I couldn't be someone who gave up before even trying. I needed to be ready. This was the moment to show him, and myself, that I deserved this chance. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I prepared as much as I could for the meeting. I researched the investor, the industry, and all the possible questions he might ask. I wanted to be ready for everything. But the fear continued to haunt me. What if he realized I knew nothing? What if he asked me something I couldn't answer? The big day arrived. The day of the meeting. I was in a small room in his office, which was imposing, with walls filled with trophies and diplomas. Everything seemed so far from my reality. But when he walked in, something in his eyes made me feel that maybe, just maybe, he believed in me more than I believed in myself. He began asking me questions. Simple but direct questions, like, what do you really want to do with this idea? Why do you think this could work? And the hardest question, why do you think I should invest in you? Those questions felt like a sharp knife, cutting through the layer of confidence I had built. I faltered, stumbled over my words a few times, but something inside me told me not to give up. I looked him in the eyes and said with sincerity, something I had never done before, because if not now, then never. And I know I'll make it happen. He remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, something unexpected happened. He smiled and said, I like your determination. I'll invest in your idea. Let's see what you're capable of. That moment, that smile, was the turning point I needed. But at the same time, something inside me knew that this wasn't the end. In fact, it was just the beginning. The real battle was only just beginning. I didn't know what to expect from the help of that millionaire, but one thing was clear from the beginning: he believed in me more than I believed in myself. That initial support felt like a gift, but also an enormous responsibility. I knew that by accepting his investment, I wasn't just receiving money, I was taking on an obligation, a commitment that would be tested with every decision I made. The fear of disappointing him grew stronger each day. In the days following our meeting, everything seemed to accelerate. He wasn't just interested in whether my idea was viable. What he wanted to see was my attitude. How would I handle the unexpected? How would I face the obstacles that were bound to arise? He gave me the freedom to take the reins of the business, but with one condition: I'm not here to do everything for you. I'm here to see what you're capable of doing on your own. As I started to work on the project more seriously, I realized that the idea I believed in wasn't as simple as it seemed. The market was more competitive than I had imagined. Established competitors with more resources seemed to dominate every space I tried to enter. Every step forward felt like taking 2 steps back. Sleepless nights became routine, and I began to question my ability to make it happen. One of the first lessons I learned was that even with the investment, success wouldn't come hand in hand with luck. I couldn't just sit back and hope things would work out. The millionaire's words echoed in my mind: you might have a brilliant idea, but without execution, it's worth nothing. That's when the first major challenge arose. I made a strategic mistake by trying to launch my product without fully understanding the needs of my target audience. I was so eager to show something to my investor that I overlooked critical details. When market feedback started coming in, I realized I had failed. Sales didn't take off, and the numbers were below expectations. My stomach churned every time I looked at the sales graph. I felt like I was letting the millionaire down, and even worse, letting myself down. I knew I couldn't keep going in the wrong direction. I needed to correct course, but the pressure was overwhelming. The investor called to check in, and the last thing I wanted to do was admit that things weren't going well. I could have tried to hide it or make excuses, but I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. At that moment, I made a tough decision. I decided to be honest. I got straight to the point. I explained the mistake, the planning flaws, and what I was doing to fix everything. That silence on the other end of the line was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life, but what came next was something I never expected: you're on the right track. Everyone makes mistakes at the start. What matters is knowing where you went wrong and how to fix it. That response was such a relief. I hadn't been judged. Instead, I was supported. And most importantly, that reaction taught me something crucial: failure isn't the end. Failure is often the only path to learning. The investor wasn't interested in easy or immediate success. He wanted to see my ability to learn, improve, and persist, even in the face of adversity. That conversation changed my perspective. I realized that what he saw in me wasn't just an idea or financial potential. What he saw was my willingness to grow, to correct my mistakes, to learn from failure, and to keep going. And at that moment, I finally believed that he was right to bet on me. Because if I could keep moving forward, even with setbacks, I had something worthwhile: perseverance. But the pressure didn't go away. On the contrary, it grew. I knew that every mistake now wasn't just mine, it was his as well. I had to make sure that, despite the obstacles, my next step would be more certain, more secure. And while my confidence was growing, the fear of failure still pushed me to strive for more, do more, and be more. In the days that followed, I started working more strategically. I sought more feedback, refined my product, and adjusted my marketing to better meet customer needs. Every move felt more calculated, more precise. I knew time was running out, and I couldn't waste the opportunity one had been given. What seemed like a critical error turned into one of the most valuable lessons of my life. That meeting with the millionaire had been a turning point. With every step I took in the world of entrepreneurship, however, my previous life, my temporary job, felt increasingly distant, and the feeling of being trapped in that soul-draining job only grew stronger. I was beginning to realize that the entrepreneurial journey, with all its challenges and lessons, had become my true passion. Yet at the same time, there was a constant pressure from my job, a place that, while financially secure, was gradually suffocating me. I could no longer ignore the mounting frustration. Each morning, as I woke up, it felt as if my heart and mind were in 2 different places. My body was there, going to work, but my thoughts were always on the ideas I was developing for my business. What once was simply a means to an end had now become a prison. The feeling of living a divided life, between what I was doing and what I truly wanted to do, was becoming unbearable. One of those days, after a meeting that felt more like a waste of time than an opportunity for growth, I came to a definitive realization: I couldn't keep going like this. That job wasn't just pulling me away from my true passion, it was also stopping me from growing, from learning, and from putting into practice everything I was starting to discover in the business world. I knew that taking the next step would mean giving up the financial security the job provided, but the question that kept echoing in my mind was, did I really want to live forever with this fear of taking risks? Did I want to remain stuck in a routine that led nowhere, or did I want to move forward and live in alignment with my true vision? That afternoon, after an especially frustrating meeting, I walked into my boss's office. I already knew what I needed to do, but the anxiety was overwhelming. When he saw me enter, looking serious, he asked, "What's wrong? You seem worried." I took a deep breath and said, in a voice I never imagined I'd have for something like this, "I'm resigning." Those words came out easier than I expected. My boss looked surprised, maybe even a little disdainful, and asked why. I, who had never been much of a risk-taker, was now making the boldest decision of my life. I've found another path. Something I want to pursue more seriously. I can't stay here anymore without being fully committed to what I truly want to do, I replied without hesitation. He didn't like my answer. He tried to convince me to stay, telling me I was being reckless, that I didn't know what was coming. "You've got a stable job here. You're throwing it all away. This won't work. You don't know what you're doing," he said, with a tone of reproach. But in that moment, something inside me became resolute. I had waited too long to take this step. I had already listened to the voices saying I wouldn't make it, that my dream wasn't viable. I knew I couldn't listen to that advice anymore. I had to follow my own path. "I appreciate the opportunity, but I need to move forward," I said, more firmly than I ever thought I could. That day was marked by a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was immense relief, a feeling of freedom, as if I had finally shed a heavy burden. But on the other hand, there was the fear of the unknown. I no longer had a safety net. No fixed salary. No comfort in routine. Yet, at the same time, I felt a growing excitement, a confidence I had never experienced before. Somehow, I knew I was going to make this work. I left the office with a determined stride, feeling like I was moving forward but with no idea what the road ahead would look like. I knew that from that moment on, my fate was in my hands. Leaving my job meant taking full responsibility for my life and my future. I was turning my back on the security of the familiar, but I was also heading toward the possibility of the unknown. And, in a strange way, that gave me a sense of power I had never felt before. In the days that followed, as I completed my last weeks at the job, I began diving even deeper into developing my business. I knew there was no more time to waste. The time I had left at work was limited, and I was determined to use every second to plan what would come next. Ideas started flowing in ways I never imagined possible. Something I had been lacking, a mental clarity, only emerged once I made the decision to free myself from that job. But the reality of being an entrepreneur, without a guaranteed paycheck and under constant pressure to make things happen, quickly proved to be far more challenging than I had anticipated. I was on the right path, but the fear of failure followed me through every new challenge. After leaving my job, a silence seemed to fill every corner around me. What once felt like liberation quickly turned into an overwhelming sense of loneliness. The daily routine of work was gone, along with the group of people I used to share my days with. Now, I was on my own, with an idea in mind and the full responsibility of making it happen. But as the days went by, the anxiety grew. I kept questioning whether I truly had what it took to survive in this new world. The transition was anything but easy. I was used to a structured routine, fixed schedules, and tasks that gave me a sense of productivity, even if I was dissatisfied with the job. Now, I was free to do whatever I wanted, but the lack of solid structure left me feeling lost. Instead of freedom, I felt the weight of uncertainty. The first weeks were pure chaos. I tried juggling the countless tasks that needed attention: marketing, product development, financial planning. Yet everything felt out of control. I lacked a clear vision of how to organize my days, and at the same time, the pressure not to fail kept mounting. Sometimes, the thought of everything going wrong consumed me so much that I could barely sleep. What would happen if I didn't succeed? What would happen if I couldn't live up to the trust the millionaire had placed in me? In those moments of despair, I began to realize that loneliness was one of the greatest challenges of entrepreneurship. Not just physical loneliness, but mental as well. I was alone in every decision. Alone during endless nights solving one problem after another. Alone on days when results didn't show and sales numbers fell short of expectations. The absence of traditional work, with colleagues, a boss, and structured routines, was unsettling. Now, I had to find motivation within myself, which wasn't always easy. The hardest part was seeing people around me, especially my friends, living their normal lives. They went to their jobs, followed their routines, while I was here trying to turn my dream into reality. Often, I felt like I was on an isolated path, unsure if all the sacrifices I was making were truly worth it. The fear of loneliness in entrepreneurship is real, a constant feeling that you have no one to share your victories or failures with. It felt like climbing a mountain alone, without a map, and not knowing where it would lead. It was in this moment of vulnerability that the truth began to crystallize. Success isn't just about strategies or plans, but also about emotional resilience. What I was experiencing wasn't just a phase of hardship, but a real test of endurance. And despite all the difficulties, I started to understand what being an entrepreneur really meant. It wasn't just about work or numbers. It was about persisting when everything seemed to fall apart. It was about continuing when no one else believed. It was about believing in yourself when the world seemed against you. One night, as I sat at my desk reviewing my action plan, something shifted. I looked at the computer screen and saw what needed to be done. It wasn't anything grand, but it was simple and straightforward. I needed to adjust my focus, better understand who my customer was, and find effective ways to reach them. I knew I was making mistakes, but I also knew I could learn from them. The millionaire hadn't given me an easy path. He had given me tools and the confidence to find my own way, which meant I had to be both creative and resilient. The loneliness was still there, but I began to see that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It gave me space to think and reflect without external distractions. Every sleepless night spent trying to figure out what was going on with my business was also an opportunity to learn more about myself and understand what I truly wanted to achieve. The first months went by in a blur. But as I started reviewing the small steps I had taken, I noticed that some things were beginning to change. I wasn't as lost as before. I knew more about my product, I understood my audience's needs better, and I began to see a few sales trickling in. They weren't big numbers yet, but they were enough to keep me motivated. Enough to remind me that, even in the silence and loneliness, there was progress. The time was passing faster than I had imagined. I no longer had the routine of a 9-to-5 job, but somehow, my days now felt even longer. I found myself waking up early, diving into the details of my business, and as time went on, the weight of responsibilities seemed to grow heavier. I had made the decision to follow my own path, and that meant everything depended on me. Over time, things started to change, but in a subtle way. The first results of my actions began to appear. Sales, which were almost non-existent before, started to grow slowly. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was enough to keep me hopeful. That small increase in sales gave me something I never expected: confidence. I knew I was still far from achieving the success I dreamed of, but seeing that something was working, the doubt that had been tormenting me was, at least for a moment, silenced. One day, while reviewing my website metrics, I noticed that the number of visitors was increasing. Even though it wasn't a significant number yet, the fact that people were starting to take interest in what I was offering made me realize that the key was there, hidden in the small victories. They were discreet, almost imperceptible, but they were proof that my efforts were paying off. However, what impressed me the most wasn't the increase in sales or visitors. What truly made me see a change was a comment from a customer. He had purchased my product, and in the message he sent me, he expressed how it had made his life easier in a way he never imagined. He thanked me for the solution I was offering and encouraged me to keep going. It wasn't something grand, but for me, it felt like a breath of fresh air. The recognition from just one person, a simple message of gratitude, made me understand that my product was truly making a difference. That message was confirmation that I was on the right path, even if it was a path full of uncertainties. Because, in the end, entrepreneurship isn't just about making money. It's about creating something that, in some way, impacts someone else's life, whether in a small or significant way. That's what I wanted. I wanted to know that, somehow, my work had an impact, that it was contributing to something bigger than myself. At that moment, I remembered a conversation with the millionaire. He always said that when building a business, victories wouldn't always come explosively or instantly. They would come gradually, in the details, in small achievements. Don't focus only on the big goal. Pay attention to the small daily victories. They are the signs that you are on the right path. Those words started to make more sense than ever. The small victories that were adding up weren't just numbers or metrics. They represented something more. They were showing me that I was building something of value, even if I wasn't there yet. The journey was happening step by step, and each step was a victory in itself. However, the battle wasn't over. I still had a lot to learn. Every day, new obstacles appeared. There were moments when I felt like I was taking missteps, making mistakes I should have already avoided. But instead of discouraging me, I was beginning to see these mistakes as a natural part of the process. They taught me, challenged me, forced me out of my comfort zone, and in doing so, made me grow. The biggest mistake I could make was to stop trying. One day, while reflecting, the millionaire called me to check on how things were going. I hesitated for a moment, fearing that he might feel I wasn't progressing as fast as he expected. But to my surprise, when I shared the small advances I had made, he congratulated me. These small victories, they are fundamental, he said. Keep focusing on them. Success isn't about getting everything right at once. Success is about not giving up. That conversation was one of the most enlightening I ever had. The pressure I was putting on myself for everything to be perfect was preventing me from celebrating the real progress I was making. The millionaire made me realize that success wouldn't be measured by speed or perfection, but by persistence. With each step, no matter how small, I was getting closer to my goal. With this new perspective, I began to look at my business differently. Instead of focusing only on what was still missing, I started celebrating what had already been achieved. The small victories were shaping me, giving me the strength to keep going, even on the hardest days. The following months felt like a roller coaster. The beginning of any entrepreneurial journey is always full of ups and downs, and I was experiencing it intensely. But what no one warned me about, what no one truly told me, was that the biggest obstacle would be the one I found within myself. It was as if I was constantly in an internal battle. Many times, I found myself fighting against doubt, insecurity, the fear of failure. The fear that, no matter how hard I tried, it still wouldn't be enough. As if all the sacrifice, all the sleepless nights, all the hard work I was putting into building my business simply wouldn't be enough to achieve success. It was just an ordinary afternoon, and I was sitting in the makeshift office I had set up at home, my head resting on the table. The words on my computer screen started to blur, the numbers no longer made sense, and the feeling that nothing was working grew stronger by the second. My cash flow was tight, my sales numbers weren't growing as fast as I had hoped, and the weight of responsibility felt unbearable. I was at my limit. That's when my phone rang. I looked at it, without much expectation, and saw the millionaire's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk to him in this emotional state, but I decided to answer. "How are you?" he asked, his voice calm and steady, as if he knew exactly what I was going through, even though I hadn't said a word. I don't know," I said, struggling to put into words the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling. "I don't know if this is going to work." I'm trying, but it feels like nothing is working. Every mistake seems more costly than the last, and I don't know where to start anymore." There was a quiet strength in his voice. "I understand. I've been there too, more times than I can count. I know what it's like. But let me tell you something, and pay attention, the true test of an entrepreneur isn't when things are going well. It's not when sales are high and metrics are positive. The real test comes when everything seems to be going wrong. When you're at rock bottom, when the numbers are in the red, when you start questioning everything, including yourself." I took a deep breath. He was right. I felt like I was at rock bottom. The feeling of being alone, of fighting against the wind, of not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, was overwhelming. "I know you're tired. I know you feel overwhelmed. I've been there too. But what separates those who make it from those who give up isn't talent or ideas. It's the ability to keep going, even when it seems impossible. Persistence. Believing in yourself, even when no one else does, not even you." At that moment, everything inside me fell silent. There was a quiet power in his words that touched me deeply. It was almost as if he was reminding me of something I already knew but had forgotten amidst all the struggles. "You will get through this. And you'll come out stronger on the other side. Remember what you've already achieved. Don't just look at what's missing, but at everything you've already built. This is the moment that will define your future, not the difficulties, but how you respond to them." His words echoed in my mind like a mantra. I was fighting against my own thoughts, against the fear of not being good enough, against the fear of failing irreversibly. But now, I felt a small spark of hope ignite. I knew I couldn't give up. I couldn't stop now. After that conversation, something changed. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, but a shift within me. I knew the road wouldn't be easy, but I had to keep moving forward, even without seeing the whole path ahead. As he had said, what separated me from success wasn't having everything perfect, it was my ability to keep going, even when everything seemed lost. In the following days, despite the pressure, I decided that I wouldn't look at obstacles as barriers anymore, but as opportunities to learn. If it was difficult, it meant I was in a place where growth was happening. I just needed to give my best and trust that, eventually, the results would come. But the weight didn't disappear immediately. One sleepless night, while reviewing my reports, a message from a customer made me stop everything. He wrote, "I didn't know what to expect, but what you delivered was more than I imagined. Thank you for not giving up. Your work is making a difference." At that moment, all the doubts, the fear, and the uncertainty disappeared for a second. I knew there was still a lot to achieve, but that message gave me a clarity I could never have imagined. Even when everything seemed to be failing, there were people out there being impacted, recognizing the value of my work. That message became my fuel. It was the sign that I was on the right path. Even on the hardest days, I had to keep going. I couldn't give up. Not now. Not after coming this far. I was beginning to see that building a business wasn't just about numbers or strategies. It wasn't just about the product I was offering or having the right tools. It was about something deeper. It was about how I saw myself, about what I believed I was capable of achieving. In the days following that client's message, something inside me shifted. It was as if a curtain had been lifted, and I could finally see reality clearly. The fear was still there, the challenges remained, but I no longer felt so small in the face of them. I was starting to understand that, yes, my business was growing, but the most significant growth was happening within me. With a renewed sense of purpose, I decided it was time to take the next step. I didn't know exactly what that step would be, but I knew it had to be bold. So, I made the decision to reinvest the little I had into the business. I was taking a risk, but I felt it was the right moment to do more. I needed to expand my presence, improve the quality of my product, and maybe even grow my team. The idea of expanding was daunting, but I knew I had to try. It was risky, of course. But without risk, there's no progress. There's no growth. I could no longer stand still, waiting for luck or perfect circumstances to come to my rescue. The only thing that could save me was action. I decided to do something I never thought I'd do so early on: hire a specialist to help improve the strategic side of the business. Until then, I had been doing everything on my own, but I knew I couldn't continue like that. I felt like a workhorse, running from one task to another, trying to do everything at once. It was time to delegate. The decision to invest in growth was terrifying. I was putting everything I had at risk, and the fear of failing again made me constantly question whether I was making the right choice. But at the same time, there was a newfound confidence growing inside me. It wasn't blind confidence, but confidence built through every small step I had taken. Every mistake, every success had brought me closer to understanding how things worked, what the life of an entrepreneur was really like. And at that moment of decision, as I signed the contract with a business consultant, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was as if I was standing at a fork in the road. I knew I had made the right decision, but the uncertainty remained, like a shadow. I knew things would be different from then on. But how different would they be? In the days that followed, I started working alongside the specialist. He had a much clearer vision of where I was going wrong and where I could improve. It felt like I was learning to walk again. Each conversation, each adjustment to the strategies made me realize how much I still had to learn. But at the same time, it gave me a sense that, finally, the pieces were starting to come together. During one particularly difficult meeting, where we had to discuss drastic changes to the marketing plan, the specialist looked me in the eye and said, "You've come this far not because you were right all the time, but because you didn't give up. You had the courage to try, even when everything seemed uncertain. Now, it's time to believe in yourself even more. Because what you have in your hands is something valuable." Those words stayed with me for days. They became a silent mantra, something I repeated to myself whenever I felt unmotivated or afraid to take the next step. I had something valuable in my hands. Not just the product I was selling, but the ability to create something unique, something that truly had the power to change people's lives. That moment of insecurity I felt when hiring the consultant soon turned into one of the biggest turning points I could have made. He brought more clarity, more focus, and more effective strategies to help me reach my target audience more efficiently. But what really made the difference was the emotional impact he had on me. He made me believe in my vision even more. He made me see that I was building something important, something that couldn't be set aside. So, with a renewed spirit of courage, I decided it was time to launch a new product. Something that reflected everything I had learned up to that point. I knew the market was saturated, that the competition was fierce, but at the same time, I knew the only way to make my business stand out was to offer something genuine, something that would truly make a difference in people's lives. And that's exactly what I did. The response was immediate. The product wasn't perfect, but it was authentic, and people started to notice. I wasn't just selling something anymore. I was sharing a part of myself, my story, and what I truly believed in. And people felt that. The impact was instant. Sales soared. Messages of gratitude started pouring in, and a deep sense of gratitude filled me. But it wasn't just about the money or the sales. It was about the fact that, finally, I was making a difference, that I had contributed in some way to someone's life. The feeling of accomplishment was indescribable. I knew there was still a long way to go, but that victory was like fuel, giving me the strength to keep going. I finally understood, success doesn't come without challenges, without moments of doubt, without mistakes. Success comes to those who, even when everything seems lost, choose to keep going. Success comes to those who, even when no one believes in them, choose to believe in themselves. If you're enjoying this journey of overcoming challenges, make sure to subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring stories like this. Let's walk this path together.